Ladies and gentlemen, it's me again. I'm back. You guys remember my last video where I said we're hosting a yard sale, and we kicked it off on July 28th, and it was phenomenal. We had people driving from all across the country, thousands of people in and out of here.
What really happened to Heavy D Sparks? The Diesel King, notorious for monster trucks, coal-rolling chaos, and a reign that terrified the competition, is finally breaking his silence at 41. 1 second he was the larger-than-life star of Diesel Brothers. The next, his world started crumbling, and a complete reinvention that shocked even his most loyal followers. What really pushed Heavy D to the edge? And what's next? The diesel empire that defined a generation. Before the lawsuits and the backlash, there was just a guy in Utah with a garage, a vision, and an obsession with diesel power. Heavy D Sparks, whose real name is David William Sparks, began flipping cars in the early 2000s. He worked long hours and learned how to build performance cars from the bottom up. He didn't get a platform, he put it together one bolt at a time. Things moved faster when he worked alongside David Diesel Dave Kiley. They started Diesel Sellers together, which focuses on extreme custom diesel vehicles with elevated suspensions, big turbos, aggressive design, and the roll coal modifications that sent thick black exhaust into the air. People who didn't like it said it was pollution. It was a rebellion to fans. Then, social media changed gasoline into jet fuel. Heavy D knew more about spectacle than most people. His YouTube account was full of films of trucks speeding over dunes, carrying crazy loads, and pushing machines to their limits. He was more than just a mechanic because of his tattoos, loud laugh, and daring attitude. He turned into a character, a name, a sign of diesel culture that doesn't apologize. The Discovery Channel started Diesel Brothers in 2016, and the empire went national. For 7 seasons, spectators saw wild builds, reckless bets, and feats that made their hearts race. Items sold out. Big car companies started giving money to the event. The store wasn't only making money, it was famous. Heavy D often made it seem like more than just business. It was about family, determination, and showing that hard work and strength could overcome anything. Heavy D wasn't just changing trucks at the height of his fame, he was starting a movement. But movements get people's attention. Environmental groups started to worry about changes that made pollution worse. Fans loved the coal-rolling tradition, but air quality campaigners didn't like it. Heavy D said in public that many builds were for off-road use and that they followed the rules when they had to. Still, more people looked closely. The motors roared louder as the spotlight got brighter, and in that limelight, the empire's basis started to show signs of weakness. The Diesel King was still smiling for the camera, but there was a lot of pressure behind the scenes, and in 2016, the change became an earthquake. The lawsuit that changed everything, it didn't start with a dramatic scene on TV. It all began with paperwork. Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment sued Diesel Sellers, Heavy D Diesel Dave, and others in federal court in 2016. The claim was based on breaking the Clean Air Act by selling defeat devices, which are equipment that change or remove emissions controls on diesel trucks. The same viral videos that helped the business grow became evidence in a court case. The litigation went on for years, converting what had been an internet argument into a real-life court case. A federal judge decided against the defendants in 2020, saying they had broken the law on purpose more than 400 times. The fine was more than $851,000 in fines and costs, which was much less than what was first thought, but it was still terrible. Heavy D spoke out against the changes in public, saying that many of them were meant for off-road or racing cars. He said that the case was an attack on personal freedom and the culture of diesel. But the court decided that the evidence revealed that sales were made to customers without the right certification. The decision stood. The effect was immediate. Sponsors pulled away. The critics got louder. The Diesel Brothers brand, which used to be impregnable, suffered damage to its reputation that money alone couldn't heal. Heavy D's outlaw reputation came into direct conflict with government accountability for the first time. By 2024, there was further legal pressure, including contempt orders related to payment issues and financial reports. Heavy D said he was partially compliant and unfairly targeted, but the court said otherwise. The judgment that wasn't paid stayed. The argument wouldn't go away. People who liked the show were split. Some people thought he was a victim of too much government control. Some people thought the results were unavoidable. What had once seemed like brave disobedience now seemed dangerous, maybe even stupid. This wasn't just a fine. It was a big change. The empire created on Diesel Thunder had to face the limitations of defiance. And while the court fight went on, Heavy D began to change in some way, and Diesel Nation would be shocked by what he did next. Confirming the rumors. In mid-2024, the unthinkable happened. Heavy D didn't make fun of a new monster construct. He didn't say he was going to do a comeback stunt. He wrote something very odd, almost like it was nothing. Sale in the garage. Everything has to go. Come get some good offers. Fans assumed it was a prank at first, a stunt for advertising, another crazy show from the Diesel brothers. It wasn't. The Bulldozer, his most prized possession and the huge hybrid that helped define the brand, was on the chopping block. Harleys made to order, original Diesel brothers trucks, tools for the shop, rare builds, things that are important to you, the things that an empire left behind. Pieces of Diesel history started to disappear one by one. The comments went crazy. Is Heavy D poor? Are you selling the legacy? Is the Diesel King dead? Heavy D eventually faced it head-on at 41. Yes, he was getting rid of things. Yes, a lot of money was moving around. He argued that it wasn't panic, though. It was a plan. Court pressures were still there, even if they weren't obvious. The money problems that came with the long-running court disputes were still there. Critics said the timing of the sale appeared fishy. People who supported it termed it a clever reorganization. The truth was probably somewhere in the middle. But Heavy D saw it in a different way. For 20 years, more was always better. Louder signified more power. More horsepower meant more power, not just under the hood, but also in how people saw it. The man who made his name by being too much was now choosing to take it away. And it wasn't just the machines. Fans also observed something else at the same time. He seemed strange. Thinner. Better for you. More calm. He talked more about faith, family, and how to break down to build up. He was a devout Mormon and said that this time of year was a time of spiritual growth for him, when he had less ego and more purpose, more substance, less show. Was this need for money dressed up as enlightenment, or was it a planned loss of skin? Despite everything, the cleansing was a genuine event. An enormous amount of money was exchanged. In a literal sense, fans drove home with pieces of the Diesel Kingdom concealed within their vehicles. Instead of feeling like a yard sale, it seemed more like a funeral. The Diesel King didn't only sell vehicles, he was taking apart an identity. But if that was the end of the old empire, what was he going to construct next? Because the events that followed Diesel Thunder would lead to a greater division among his fans than any lawsuit could possibly hope to achieve. The controversial pivot to electric trucks. Ember Motors was launched in 2024, according to Heavy D's announcement. Rather than focus on diesel dominance, this new corporation would prioritize the development of electric innovations. There were a lot of folks in the industry who had already given up on the Nikola Badger as a moniker. During the same time that Nikola was experiencing difficulties in his firm, which included the highly publicized conviction of its founder for fraud, the concept of an electric and hydrogen-powered pickup truck was completely abandoned. The majority of people believed that the Badger was a cautionary tale. According to Heavy D, it was a matter of unfinished business. Through Ember Motors, he was able to acquire intellectual property that was associated with the Badger platform. He also collaborated with attorney Cole Cannon and framed the project as a rebirth rather than a revamping of the concept. A rugged, zero-emission truck that could traverse dunes, pull massive loads, and still look like the fierce diesel fans liked, was his vision. He wanted to create this truck without the emissions concerns that had plagued him in the past. The response was quick and mixed. Some of his longtime fans said he was betraying the culture that helped him build his empire. People were very angry in the comment areas. From rolling coal to plugging in, critics wondered. Some people thought this was less about innovation and more about appearances, an effort to show that they care about the environment while the legal disputes were still going on. Heavy D pushed back. He said over and over that this wasn't leaving, it was the process of evolution. He characterized the turnaround as a move ahead instead of giving up in interviews and videos. Rules were getting stricter. The car business was going through changes. He said that ignoring that change would be unwise, not rebellious. Ember Motors touted ideas for integrating solar power, using recycled materials, and being able to go off-road. The message was clear. Pollution didn't have to come with power. Still, development was in its early stages. There was no formal introduction of a production model by 2026, and dates were still changing. People who supported it saw patience. Skeptics saw doubt. The shadow of Nikola's fall hung over everything, making people think about danger and trust in a silent way. But one thing was clear. This was not just a change in appearance. It was a change in philosophy. For a guy whose identity had been tied to diesel thunder, the quiet of electric torque meant more than just a business change. At its foundation, it urged starting over. And behind the technical drawings and talks with investors, another change was happening. This one had less to do with trucks and more to do with the person driving them. The hidden truth. There was a quieter drama going on behind the legal battles, the garage sale, and the electric prototypes. Heavy D said himself that he had reached a breaking point. Years of relentless filming, business pressure, legal scrutiny, and public condemnation had taken a toll that even a lot of horsepower couldn't outrun. What used to feel like adrenaline began to feel like tiredness. The outlaw persona that got millions of people excited started to feel weighty, like it was planned. Burnout doesn't come with flashing lights. It comes in slowly. And for someone whose brand depended on passion, stepping back wasn't simply hard, it was also dangerous. Heavy D started talking more openly about losing his identity when he was 41. What do you do when your whole image is based on being the diesel king, and that kingdom starts to fall apart? In interviews and on social media, he said he felt broken to rebuild. He talked about changing his priorities, spending more time with his wife, Ashley, and their kids, and stopping the crazy stunts that used to define his content. Faith also became the main theme of his story. The fact that Heavy D has been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for a considerable amount of time means that he has always been aware that religion plays a role in his life. On the other hand, he claimed that in the most recent few years, he had a more profound spiritual awakening that was less about public identification and more about finding his footing on the inside. He stated that the legal proceedings and the arrest were events that humbled him and caused him to reflect on himself rather than take a stand against the situation. Some supporters saw this change as a sign of maturity. Some others wondered if it made him less sharp, which was what made him famous. People online were wondering if this was a carefully planned shift in image. Or was it a real reckoning after years of constant stress? It's apparent that the change went beyond only the corporate approach. Weight loss, changes in lifestyle, and a clear drop in on-camera arrogance all showed that recalibration was needed. He looked less angry and more thoughtful. The man who spoke the loudest was picking quieter talks. This wasn't the big fall of a bad guy. It wasn't a carefully planned redemption arc either. It was more difficult than that. A man facing the price of the empire he built and wondering if power without peace was worth it. And when Heavy D changed his destiny, Diesel Nation asked more and more, what does it mean for the culture if its largest figure can change? Movements don't usually stay the same when leaders change. Personal transformation. What if the most significant transformation in Heavy D's life wasn't a truck, a car build, or flashy gadgets, but himself. By the age of 41, fans weren't just following his latest vehicle innovations or electric pivots. Something far more profound was happening, hidden from the cameras and the viral highlights. The change wasn't superficial, it was internal. After years of legal battles, public scrutiny, and the adrenaline-fueled pace of his career, Heavy D began quietly rebuilding the areas of his life that truly mattered. The first noticeable shift was in his physical appearance. By embracing a healthier lifestyle, committing to regular exercise and taking care of his body, he shed a remarkable amount of weight. The chaotic, high-sugar, high-stress lifestyle that had kept him wired and restless gave way to a steadier rhythm, one marked by intentional choices and self-discipline. Moderation became his new signature, a stark contrast to the excesses that had once defined him. Fans and followers immediately noticed the change, but for Heavy D, it was never about appearances. It was about reclaiming control and balance in a life that had often felt out of control. Even more impactful was the shift in his family life. Heavy D started prioritizing meaningful, planned time with his wife, Ashley, and their children. The moments together became deliberate, structured, and intentional, far from the chaotic routines of the past. Interviews and personal recordings revealed that his family had become his anchor, steadying him during the storms of legal and professional challenges. The garage, once merely a stage for pranks, viral content, and adrenaline-driven stunts, evolved into a space for connection, reflection, and building a legacy. Heavy D began thinking not just about horsepower and clout, but about the life he wanted to create for himself and his loved ones. Spirituality, too, took on a deeper, more reflective role. Faith had always been part of his life, but now it became purposeful and grounding. Heavy D shared openly, "God broke me in order to rebuild me stronger." Supporters resonated with his honesty, seeing humility and resilience rather than shame in the journey. The past years, full of challenges, scrutiny, and pressure, were reframed as lessons, shaping perspective and deepening self-awareness. Ultimately, this transformation wasn't about cars, clicks, or viral fame. It was about legacy, discipline, and intentional living. Heavy D's reinvention shows that true power doesn't roar from engines or flashy stunts. It grows quietly in family, faith, and the courage to rebuild oneself from the ground up. Among the initiatives, there were some that were less intense. He claimed that a portion of the money he gained from the sale of his assets was being donated to initiatives located in Utah that are geared toward young people. Suddenly, people started talking about the idea of a Sparks Academy, which would be a place where young builders could learn about environmentally friendly automotive technology and ethical innovation. It is not a grand ceremony to cut the ribbon. All that was planted were seeds. The content was altered too. Less crazy stunts, more planned builds, more talks about how to find a balance between freedom and duty. The old outlaw persona didn't go away, but it did get softer. Rumours that he was about to quit for good? Not really, but he was changing. If the purpose of this was to fix the guy, then the next question that needed to be answered was even more significant. What happens to the movement that he helped start when the voice of its most prominent members changes? Because Heavy D's change wasn't happening on its own, it was happening at the same time as a cultural change that diesel aficionados could no longer ignore. Heavy D Sparks has now confirmed what Diesel Nation has been saying for years. He is now 41 years old and has gone through lawsuits, liquidation, arrest, backlash, reinvention, and a spiritual reset. The Diesel King didn't go away. He grew up. And maybe that's the genuine proof of all the rumours. Not going bankrupt, not losing. Don't fall apart, but change. At 41, Heavy D didn't just confirm the rumours, he detonated them. The Diesel King sold the empire, faced the fallout, and chose reinvention over ruin. Is this the smartest comeback of his career, or the final chapter of an outlaw era? Drop your thoughts below, and like, subscribe, and stay tuned.